Good afternoon. My name is Bhairavi Shankar, and I'm here at the 2017 Canadian Science Policy Conference. And joining me today is Dr. Maurice Bitran, the CEO of the Ontario Science Centre. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for asking me.
So firstly, I'd like to ask you if you could expand on what you do at the Science Centre and what is unique about it.
Sure. So for the last 3 years or so, I've had the good fortune to be the CEO and Chief Science Officer at the Ontario Science Centre, which is really an iconic institution in Ontario that opened in 1969, is welcome over 52 million people, and we welcome about 1 million visitors a year. And it's about science and interactivity. And so it's, I think, a very important role in a society like ours that is heavily based in science and technology, that there is a place that the public can go and try to
Engage.
know more about the world that surrounds them as it relates to science and technology.
So you were just at a panel moments ago before we came
Yes.
here. Can you talk to about what the panel discussed and who
Sure.
was participating and what came out of it?
So the panel was about science culture, and I think it's a very important question to discuss. Do we have a science culture? Do we value science, right? And what does that mean for us as a society, and what does that mean for our economic future and our social future? So this was based partly on a survey that or a presentation that the Council of Canadian Academies did a few years ago, and also on a survey that the Ontario Science Centers, the Ontario Science Centre commissioned last year and this year on the science literacy. I think that is key for a society like ours, that our general public are science literate, because every important policy decision that we need to make
Yes.
has some connection with science.
Yes.
And so it's almost a requisite for meaningful democratic participation. And I think if we don't do that and people kind of turn their backs on science, it's hugely dangerous for society.
And can you comment on how Canada is doing in that regard currently with comparison rather to our neighboring countries or even across the pond?
So we had some conflicting results from the two surveys, right? And the survey from the the Council of Canadian Academies had a pretty good relative position for Canada compared to other countries. The results from our survey weren't as good in that, for example, 1/3 of Canadians said that they consider themselves science illiterate, and 43% of Canadians thought that science is a matter of opinion. And so we tried to reconcile the two and see maybe it has to do with how the questions are asked, and also how things have evolved. For example, in the survey in 2016, we saw that 40% of people asked thought that the science behind climate change was unclear. This year, the number was 47%, which is statistically significant higher.
Yes, over a
And
year.
so, has the political climate of the last year had an influence on people, changing their opinions? And I would add that we shouldn't be complacent about doing better than the States, for example. When you look at averages, that masks that things are going on in specific areas can be much higher, in other areas much lower.
Sure.
And also, I think that there are, like movements like against evolution or against vaccination and whatnot, and in other countries that likely they're not very strong here. But I think we shouldn't be complacent about the results. We need to make sure that we have a stronger science culture in Canada.
And with the, I guess, accessibility to facts through social media, for example, I gather that would be a very strong component in taking forward whenever, as we continue to define the culture in Canada.
Facts and alternative facts, right? There is
Yes.
a lot of stuff in social media
Exactly.
that is not true. And so what is critical for a good science culture in Canada is that the public has the tools to discriminate and ask the right questions,
Right.
understand how science works, so they can critically distinguish between the actual, scientific information and that what is not.
Right.
It's very critical that we provide these tools to our children as they're growing up.
Right. So, what would you recommend us as scientists that we do as we start to engage with the public to help them think critically and engage and be better informed?
I think that there are a number of things that we can do. In our survey, it showed that science centers, scientists, and educational institutions rank very high in trust from the public about getting information. And so I think we should make use of that trust, that privilege in a society where we see trust going down. So that's one thing. So we need to act jointly. I think also we need to focus on the methods and the process of science rather than on specific factual information. Because factual information will, in a few years may no longer be valid, but,
Sure.
but the critical approach to understand something will still be valid. So learning how to learn. And I think that we need to also be respectful of knowledge that people have. We shouldn't think of, the public doesn't know, so we should give them. But rather, there's a lot of, among the public, people, lots of smart people, well-informed people, and I think we need to engage them in the way that they feel participants.
So we are at the Science Policy Conference. What, in your view, is the greatest contribution of having such an event?
Well, I think it's great that the Science Policy Conference is grown to the stage that it has, both in the number of people and the importance of people that come and support it from government, federal, provincial, etc. I think it's great. I think there are a couple of things, though, that I think could improve it. One, I think that here we're talking to the choir, we're preaching to the choir.
Sure.
All the people are here are either scientists or policymakers, and so we just are reaffirming, what we think. It is critical that we engage the public. In a democratic society, there is a danger between, of having these groups going kind of their separate ways.
Right.
The other point, I think that we shouldn't only talk about science policy, but we should also talk about science for policy, of the role of science in public policy.
Okay.
I think there is a dearth. Science and policy are kind of two different specialties, and if you specialize in one, generally you don't know much about the other. And I think it's important that we train our scientists on how policy is made, and we train our policymakers on the basis of science so they know what to ask. I teach a course that's called The Role of Science in Public Policy at the University of Toronto for the Masters in Public Policy. I believe that's the only course of its nature in Canada. I think there needs to be more of that, of creating that common language between the scientific community and the policy community.
So hopefully things to keep in mind that by the time we regroup next year, we
I
have
think
some
there's places to grow.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's a great conference. I'm very happy I was invited to this panel. It's a great discussion. I think in particular, Bernardo Hariri deserves big congratulations for taking this event to the place that it has today.
Well, I thank you for joining us ahead of lunch. If people would like to learn more about events, activities at the Science Center, OntarioScienceCenter.ca, everything is there, including the survey that we just talked about. Yes.
In the panel.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay,
Enjoy the rest of your days here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.